Okay, folks, welcome back. And everybody who has the slides, we can get the thumbs up and we can keep going forward. Thank you very much for joining us, both the folks in the audience and everybody virtually as well. I'm Jonathon Lance from Trusted Internet, and we're going to talk about a real-world ransomware case that we actually worked with and were able to solve and help a client out with. So that's how we start 4 days. So Stan, I'm gonna start off and try to click through this thing, and we'll go through it. But if not, I'll give you the hand signal here. Okay, it works. So, all right. So we'll start off with, and as Steve said, we got Jeff on, and Jeff is here on audio and can join for any questions afterwards. But so for Trusted Internet, I'm Jonathon Lance. I'm the COO, and was able to be close enough to drive down here to work with. But the guy I work for is the face of the company as well. So Jeff has a deep background in growing up, prior enlisted and officer, working on cybersecurity in the Navy and with the DoD and government, and growing up to transform into being working for Cisco and also the with DICE as well, to bring us into the realm with what we're doing today. So he and the group of the folks that work for him there were able to bring this program up to where we see finally the government regulation driving folks to being able to come to a place where we're actually able to provide the service to them. For the rest of us at Trusted Internet, the team.
Sorry, the slides aren't presenting online. So
Stan, go ahead.
Give me 1 second.
Yep. So next, so here's our team. So I'm the COO and CFO at Trusted Internet, and we also have folks. So most of us, we have a pretty diverse DoD background. From Nate Paddock, who was one of the Air Force SOC folks, and as well as the rest of the guys you see down at the bottom of the page. We all grew up facing the cyber threat that we saw in DoD and around, and we're bringing that on to the corporate realm as well. Next slide. So here's what we're doing. So we focus on small and medium-sized businesses, mostly as the company, but as well, and why we're here, we see that CMMC is a real thing that companies are facing, both from the DoD and from the primes as well. So we're working with H2L to make sure that these companies are in sync and have the auditing and make sure that everything is checked and ready to go. But for us specifically as an MSSP, we bring from the endpoint to the organization as well protection. So with our own internal 24/7 SOC. So that is the big thing that we're bringing to it. And then as well, we just have the industry experience to be able to see what is good, what is not, and then help these companies roll to a point where they're going to be okay with what it is that the prime is dictating, but also DoD eventually as well. Next slide. So here's what I'm here to tell a story about, which is kind of fun. So we were brought in, and it's been about 2 years now, from a client who was providing physical security to a company, an oil and gas company. And they had a weird anomaly in their data center in the Middle East and Asia. And things kind of started to go downhill from there. So a couple hours later, 1,000 servers became encrypted, and all of this company's IT just shut down. And when you say shut down, they said, hey, 98% of our stuff is gone. What do we do? And for them, fortunately, it was mid-quarter, but still, everything is gone. So what do we do? Next slide. So all of the backup systems and all of the data encryption, the ransomware that came in actually infected that too. They turned the VMs off, and then immediately after they turned the VMs off, they flipped right back on. And within a few minutes, everything else was encrypted. So they had no comms. So imagine the company shutting down, no email across the board. They really didn't know the extent of the damage that they had that was going on. I mean, it was very much a crisis. So the problem is when you're a multiple billion-dollar oil and gas company, you're losing $25 million a day, and they were basically facing an extinction event for the company because everything was shut down. They weren't able to do anything. Next slide. So what happened is we were brought in and we helped interface with, and we'll see a little bit of that later with the FBI and a few other folks, but we worked with the folks that were in charge of the company, and they decided they were going to pay the ransom. The ransom that we worked on was about $700,000. So we got together with them and did the transfer. So it takes about 6 hours to do a Bitcoin transfer of multiple $100,000 increments, which is what you see on the screen right here. And we worked through it with the folks who had taken over the company. Once we engaged them and we started to pay them, it was very much a customer service transaction, actually. So they were very helpful, responsive, and we started to send the money to their Bitcoin wallets, which we did over $100,000 increments. Once we were done with the transfers, they said, "Thank you very much. We'll be in touch." And they went silent for 3 hours, which was kind of wild. 3 hours later, they said, "Okay, here's your file that you can use to unencrypt all the devices." The first one didn't work, which was kind of scary. The second one they sent was just fine. And then we started to kind of bring everything back to life for the company, which the one thing that we learned is that the folks took some time to kind of reshuffle the deck, and shuffling the deck when you're in a ransomware case is not a good thing, but we were able to bring them up. So next slide, Sam. So when we talk about 4 days for this brief, this is the 4 days. The IT group for the company took 4 days before they informed the folks who were in charge of what was going on. And that's one of the really big things to pass on. So the extent of the damage was very much unknown over the first couple of days. And really, once they were 72 hours into it, they engaged multiple vendors, folks who were incumbent in the company, and then people on the outside. And they really didn't want to touch it, which was kind of interesting, which is fine, and that's where we came in. So on day 4, we came in and worked with the company from the top down. So the board was notified. We talked to the CEO and the rest of the folks there as well. We notified the FBI and through counsel, which is a very important thing. And we worked with them as well, just to say, hey, this is what we're doing. And we got the blessing to pay the ransom, and which is what we did. But the interesting thing is that once we pushed all the data across and paid the ransom, everything turned into very much a customer service thing. They were very helpful. Their English was really good, the folks that we worked with, and they made sure that we were very much taken care of. So by day 5, we were really pushing restoration, which was happening across the company. And then by day 6, decryption pretty much took everything out of lockdown, and we had everything back online. And then within the week, we were restored and everything was validated, and we had everything kind of ops normal. Next slide. So here's how it happened, which is how it happens for many companies that are affected by this. Somebody who's an authorized user grabs a link. There's a software update that looked legitimate, and she was able to push it across her computer, and it was infected with malware. And then the infection spread across her machine, across the board for everybody else, and through the backup system, and there they were. Next slide. So the infection that we saw, it was Dridex, which is what we see still versions of that today as well. It was a botnet install. It was a credential sealer. It came up, and that was how the folks who were fighting it were able to kind of work and manage the company. And it basically just inserted the BitPayment ransomware as well. The interesting thing is that we saw that they had pretty much full control of the company once they were in, and everything was spread across. Next slide. So when we came in, one of the big things that we did on immediate actions while we were working the negotiation was, hey, obviously endpoint protection goes to all the endpoints for the company across the board. Global password reset as well to make sure that just the easy to access things were taken care of. And then just social media, cloud storage, USB devices, just shut it down across the company, just to make sure that everything in that easy access realm was secure. And that was really the first 24 hours as we pushed to decrypt as well, just to make sure that everything was okay. Next slide. So as well, we made sure that the baseline hardening was completed to bring everything back up to speed to keep things from reinfecting the network. We made sure that we had, as us, a third-party security operations, and then we transitioned the firewalls to 24/7 monitoring as well. And then also made sure that we had the intelligence, the up-to-date and up-to-the-minute intelligence like fired into those firewalls as well. As well, we did additional advanced security tools and to further harden the environment afterwards, because what we're looking for is the resonant things on the environment, right? While you may have a ransomware event and you can move past it, there's probably something or some things still there that are still existing in the environment that you want to find. And then we wrapped it all up with a pen test as well, just to make sure that we didn't have any doors open. Next slide. So, lessons learned. Seconds count. So with this company, the people who were in charge didn't know what was going on for a few days. You need to have the good relationship with your information security and your IT team where they can tell you that something's wrong on day one. They were losing $25 million a day. So by day 4, right, we're at $100 million. The big thing is being able to have that person to bring the information to you early and trust them, and then being able to take action. This can happen to anyone, anybody on the call, right? You can have a 5-person business, a 1-person business, or a 300-person business. It's all the same, and things will infect across your network. We've even seen this week where we had a really good, a company that had a really good cybersecurity setup, and they still were infected by some ransomware, and someone stole a PST out of one of the EA's files, and now 3 to 1,000 customers are getting emails from someone who sold their creds online and the PST, and just an unstoppable email chain with people sending ransomware, right? So even if the company is locked down, there's plenty of places to be able to secure stuff. The other thing is be ready. And obviously, if you're on this call with us in person or virtually, you're looking to do that. we can make sure that everything that you have is secure, and we can make sure that those things that you worry about at night, from the network itself to your individual computers, are taken care of. So it won't be stopped. It's constant. All these attacks that happen are happening in real time, but we can definitely help you manage them as they come about. So here's the important summary of what's going on. So it took 4 days for the IT team to tell the CEO of the company what was going on. It was definitely before he told the board, and even before he knew that all of his systems were compromised. So really make sure, and as the folks that are on this call, make sure you have that engagement with the leadership of your company or your organization that you're with, so that you can tell them what's going on and what's wrong at that point in time. They took about 25 mil per day, and then had $700,000 in the ransom that they paid to get rid of it. And then it took about $4 million in remediation, which their insurance was able to cover. But the important message here is to take care of this before anything else happens. It's much cheaper to do it on the front end. Next slide. So the big question is this your IT? The walled garden, everything is taken care of in a peaceful place. But that being said, what do you have in the cloud, which looks like this? Who's next door to you? Whose data is being stored there? What do they have that can go between the wall and your stuff as well? That's another thing to consider. Next slide. So as well, what's happening in the company that you have without the firewall, without everything in place? Fast internet is cheap, but is also a way for things to come into and infect the company. Next slide. So this is what the typical office looks like, and this is the install for Netgear that we see. Without a firewall, without endpoint management, which opens everything up to the opportunity for someone to come in. Jeff, I'm going to transition to you right now here to talk about these things. Yep.
Yeah, I'm here. So, look, this is actually taken from something else, but the idea was to show that everything is interconnected, right? So beyond the ransomware, the virtualization, I mean, it hit a lot of different things. What we're seeing is that just because of the expanding footprint, the one on the right, for example, is transportation stuff. So you go into an airport, you're tracked by beacons, your bags are tracked by tags. You've got RFIDs. Every movement that you make is tracked. If you go into Walmart, it's the same thing. If when you're working in some of these environments, you may not know that as you're operating in the cloud, just about everything that you do is collected, monitored, and manipulated. And so it's really easy to have interconnected to spread the security, or spread the insecurities. Next slide. So I'm going to take on this one as well, right? So just a couple of things that most people don't think about. And in fact, I'm going to start from the most prevalent threat, and I'm going to work to the lowest. They're all pretty much equal except for one, the physical security systems. We literally bat 1,000 when we go in and we put a sniffer behind a firewall and we start collecting data. The very first thing that we see compromised in every single environment in which we deploy is the network video recorder for the physical security video monitoring systems. 100% all the time, never fail. Cloud is next, generally because people don't understand how to secure cloud, and so there's a whole industry forming around this in the managed security space called cloud security performance management. Mobiles are a big deal because they're just computers that are in your hand. In fact, I was joking the other day some guy had bought a new phone in a hotel that we were staying at in northern Maine, and I kind of joked and said the phone's got more computing power than the whole hotel, and it really did. Cryptocurrency mining, browser-based stuff. We see this stuff all the time. Executives. This is a kind of a big one. So one of the things that Jonathon didn't talk about is that company that we protected the ransomware event in. We fended off dozens of reattack attempts over the course of several months, and so one of the things that's come out of that is I do a talk on threats to executives and threats to people in their homes. And this is one of the case studies I use. I've got a couple of really good ones, but in this case where we had the company got ransomed, like I said, several attempts to re-ransom over the course of the next couple of months until the night of the Christmas party at the CEO's home. So we saw a TTP go against the company that we were able to fend off, and we saw the exact same attack profile go against the CEO's home that night during the corporate Christmas party. But in this case, there's this woman that's sitting in the middle. This is actually a really good story. She's the number 2 in a large financial firm, and she the Netgear router in her house was turned into a keystroke logger, and they captured her usernames and passwords, and then they used those they ported over her telephone number from her cell phone to Google Voice. And between those, they were able to call into the many bank accounts that she had and gain access to the ability to change. Well, they changed the pins, and then they got access to her ATM and her accounts. And they literally stole $82,000 in $2,400 increments over the course of a couple of weeks. So we were brought in to go out and fix that. Kids are a huge threat, especially in the homes right now. But if we see a company come under attack, the executives get attacked as well, 100% of the time, same way. The problem is we can lock down the executive, and we can put firewalls in the homes. We can do all of those kinds of things, but the kids get targeted as well, and they get targeted with hopes that they're going to get a foothold in that home network, and then they use the home network to get on, VPNs or whatever back to the company. Happens all the time. Next. So this is one that I pulled off of Shodan. If you haven't seen Shodan.io, great source of leak information. So this one was just one where I did a search for airlines a few months back, but I'd done this also for, Yuba, or you could do them for video or whatever else, and find out, how many devices around the world are actually leaking and available. So one of the lessons that I talk about is, look, no matter how hard you try, everything leaks, and you're going to have a leak, and it's going to happen. You just have to be prepared to be able to manage the leaks. Next. Jonathon, you want to jump back in here? You want me to keep going?
Sure, I can jump back on here as well. So here's how we take care of it. This is what we do as Trusted Internet. We lead with Fortinet mostly for the company, take care of you. And what we do is we work with both your actual on-station networks in the company to secure that with a firewall. And then we also put endpoint protection down to the individual computer. So no matter where your worker is, either behind the firewall in the office or at home, they're protected. And what we do is we install both an AV and a anti-malware system on the computers. And then as well, we do the firewalls. So you're connected. So at work or where you're manufacturing or taking care of things, you're behind the firewall. Or if you're at home, you're connected via VPN to our system, which is in Iron Mountain in Massachusetts as well, and make sure that you have a secure connection. So no matter where you are, you're connected and protected. We do that kind of as a low cost and high payoff system, much less than other places. And we're able to work down to the individual company, especially in the DoD and CMMC environment, to make sure that you're taken care of, because the regulation is there. You have to be compliant, obviously. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that your company is taken care of so that you don't have an event which looks like the company that we were talking about right now, because it can happen. It can happen very much to you as it will for somebody who is a much bigger target. So just by the fact that you're being taken care of by our security operations center and our systems, it also brings you into the compliance space, which is why we're working with Jonathon and H2L and the other companies to make sure that we have the paperwork and the regulation and the stuff that's published to make sure that you're all set. And it's pretty painless to do as well. Next slide. So we typically lead with Fortinet for folks who are going to be CMMC level 3 and above. It takes care of you and it makes sure that there's not things that are on the environment. And then we also take care of not only the business, but the home environment as well, because what we see is the executives are affected is just as much as the business itself. Next slide. All right, so we'll open up to questions to me and Jeff about what we do and some of the things that we've seen. Anybody?
Well, here's one question that I had. So what costs are you seeing within the defense industrial base as it pertains to CMMC for small, medium-sized companies? If you or Jeff could answer that. That's an open-ended question, but.
Sure. So it is not cheap, obviously. To get your company up to standard is not yet again, it's not a heavy lift. So there's two things that you're looking at. One is making sure that your stuff is protected, making sure that it's not getting out there and your business isn't getting shut down. But then again, you also have to meet those contracts. So Jeff, as far as the lift goes for the expense, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'll take that. So look, this is something that I've been, I rack my brains on, and I've tried to do it in a very mechanical way. So if we had to come in, put a full stack of technology in place to do all of the different things that need to be done, and we kind of do it on an a la carte basis, right? So if you need this, then we prescribe that. If you need this, and you've got all the controls for level 3 that we all know them. So first of all, from a, let's say that we're going to look at a 20-person company, just as a ballpark, you're going to go through a pre-audit, right? Because you want to know what the gap assessment really looks like. Where do you have to be? And that could cost you $20,000 to $30,000. You're going to look at, standard types of technologies for the ComSec monitoring or the communication security monitoring, which might cost you $500 a month and $2,000 for a 3-year license on a firewall, plus or minus. You're going to be looking at additional auditing capabilities that are required. That's going to cost you, expect that there's going to be a cost per gigabyte of storage for log aggregation for those things, and then depending on how long you want to keep them, you're looking at, if you've got to have training, then you've got to have, somebody that's going to set you up with the training that's going to go on through the year, the fish tests, all those kinds of things. Baseline architecture, the technology really is the easy part, right? So you're not looking at a crazy amount of money in technology. You're looking at a crazy amount of money in the consulting fees that are going to write your policies, write the procedures, make sure that the procedures are baked in, because you can't just write a procedure, an SOP, and then have an auditor come in the next day and expect that you're going to pass. You're not. And if you do, then the auditors should be, the auditor is wrong. So you've got to be able to come in, get the technology stack in place. It is not that crazy to do the technology stack, but you're looking at, even a small company is looking at having to have a virtual CISO come in to kind of lead a configuration control board who is going to work with your MSP. And oh, by the way, we've seen MSPs just dig their heels in because they don't always charge by the hour, they charge by the server. So we've seen ISPs just dig their heels in and refuse to make changes, which will directly affect your ability to pass CMMC. Expect all in with policies written, with processes written, with configuration management, with technologies, probably looking at about $100,000. That's a tough number to swallow, but I think it's pretty realistic. So the question that we just got was, how do we deal with insider threats? Yeah, that's a great question. So we've had a couple of those cases. There are two ways there are multiple ways to skin the insider threat cat, right? So number one is you start with HR, and you want to make sure that if you've got people that are at the bottom 5% of your employee pile during review period, if you're a bigger company. And so I had to deal with this as a Northrop Grumman guy, and we wanted to make sure that frontline managers were letting security know when they had somebody that was falling below performance standards, and then we could monitor for things that were going to leak. In another case right now, I've got one that's going on where there's a lot of movement in a couple of the companies that we work with, because they're oil and gas, right? And the price of the barrel is low. It goes up and down, and so we see a lot of moving going on, and they really worry about insider threat, especially when they're potentially looking at divestitures. And in those cases, we've gone through and we've retagged data just from a defensive perspective. We've retagged data. We put watermarks and things like that into documents. We look at them on the FortiGates. The FortiGates have a rudimentary DLP functionality so that we can actually look for those watermarks when something is leaving. If we've got folks that we think are going to do more, we could start to look for movement of data to other drives, things like that. And a whole different perspective at the executive level. Typically, we take more of a counterintelligence approach, a human counterintelligence approach, where we want to be proactive. We'll look at the executives in a company. If we want to go deeper than the executives, we can do that. But we want to find out if they've got connections to people who want to steal things from us. And so we have the ability to do those kinds of counterintelligence folks. We've got several of them, available on staff, and they literally will go back and start to look through. I mean, they kind of basically do your background check all over again, and they want to find out who you're associated with, who you stay associated with, and then as a company, you make a decision about how you want to deal with them. At a pure technology level, we're looking for those things that give us tipping and queuing, and then we follow data governance, right? You could be looking at data movement through different kinds of tools, or inside net flow movement, or whatever. So just giving you a whole bunch of information, John. There's a lot of ways that we could talk about. We could talk about insider threat. In fact, I think you're one, because you yelled at me in your email. You're all caps, so it must be. Okay, who's next? Any other questions?
Yeah, one more, Jeff.
Okay.
One more. So the last one that we have is, what recommendations would you give a small business that's trying to get into the Govcon space and is, I guess, concerned whether they should go ahead and go full-blown CMMC, or should they, I guess, focus on the DFARS 7012 regulation and the NIST ARA 171?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's funny because that comes up every single time we go into a company. Should we? And it really isn't a question about a new company trying to figure out whether they should go into the government space. It's about every company trying to figure out if they want to stay in the government space. And the answer that we give them is, eat the elephant one bite at a time. This is not a one and done process. You're not going to get it all done. Let's come in, turn as much as we can green at the lowest cost. We green the simple things first, and then we work through the process of doing the harder stuff as we go on. But it's a tough decision. So we've got about I think we've got about 9 companies in our CMMC process right now, and every single one of them is making the business decision about whether or not they actually want to stay in the government space.
Wow.
And it's because they're looking at having to spend, all that money up front, and we kind of just reassure them, look, we can do this, but let's do it one step at a time.
Right. That's interesting. Thanks for your insight, Jeff, Jonathan. Always a pleasure to have you
presenting with us, and we look forward to many more years to come. Thank you, Jeff, for taking the time out of your day. I know you're up in the eastern part of the country.
New Hampshire. Yep.
New Hampshire, yeah. And Jonathan, thanks for traveling down here to Huntsville to be here in person. So we really appreciate your participation. And before we hear from our next speaker, Mr. Randy Batat from the CEO of Prevail, we're going to take a short break, 15-minute break, and we're going to come back at 10:45. Everyone who's online, we are going to reconvene at 10:45 to listen to Mr. Randy Batat, the CEO of Prevail.